Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Thomas H. Johnson edition, and we are now in poem 789, On a Columnar Self. Now, columnar only gets used one time in all of our poetry, and let's remind ourselves that those early church fathers who sat on top of a column, we call them the stylets, would live atop a pillar as showing their devotion to the cause. And I think Emily may have some of that standing behind this project. Now, this is Emily in her maybe most Emersonian, transcendental, self-reliant phase. In other words, Emily's going to argue in this poem, all I need is what I got. Now, it's pretty clear that she's talking about her poetic venture. And in many ways, we're building off of a number of earlier poems. Can I remind you of a few of those? Do you remember 250? I shall keep singing. Birds will pass me on their way to yellower climes, each with a robin's expectation, I with my redbreast and my rhymes. Late when I take my place in summer, but I shall bring a fuller tune. Vespers are sweeter than matins, Signor. Morning, only the seed of noon. Do you remember when we did 261? And she played this game. Put up my lute, what, of my music? Since the sole ear I cared to charm, passive as granite, lapse my music, sobbing will suit as well as song. Pay attention to the use of that word granite. Would but the minion of the desert teach me the strain that vanquished him when he surrendered to the sunshines. Maybe that would awaken them. Do you remember when we did 270? One life of so much consequence, yet I for it would pay my soul's entire income in ceaseless salary. One pearl to me so signal that I would instant dive, although I knew to take it would cost me just a life. The sea is full, I know it. That does not blur my gem. It burns distinct from all the row, intact and diadem. The life is thick, I know it, yet not so dense a crowd. But monarchs are perceptible far down the dustiest road. Do you guys remember when we did 435? Much madness is divinest sense to a discerning eye. Much sense the starkest madness. 'Tis the majority in this is all prevail. Assent and you're sane. Demure, you're straightway dangerous and handled with a chain. Do you guys remember when we did 508? I'm seated. I've stopped being theirs. The name they dropped upon my face with water in the country church is finished using now. And they could put it with my dolls, my childhood, and the string of spools I've finished threading too. Baptized before without the choice, but this time, consciously of grace, unto supremest name. Called to my full, the crescent dropped, existence's whole arc filled up with one small diadem. My second rank, too small the first, crowded, crowing on my father's breast, a half unconscious queen, but this time adequate, erect, with will to choose or to reject. And I choose just a crown. Or how about 750? You guys will remember when we played this game. Growth of man, like growth of nature, gravitates within. Atmosphere and sun endorse it, but it stir alone. Each, its difficult ideal, must achieve itself through the solitary prowess of a silent life. Effort is the sole condition, patient of itself, patience of opposing forces, and intact belief. Looking on is the department of its audience, but transaction is assisted by no countenance. And finally, you'll remember 753. My soul accused me, and I quelled, as tongues of diamond had reviled. All else accused me, and I smiled. My soul that morning was my friend. Her favor is the best disdain toward artifice of time or men, but her disdain toward lighter bear a finger of enamelled fire. Now, our assumptions is that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily's our playlist. Hopefully you've worked through our set of introductory comments as well as the preceding 788 poems. We just finished with 788, Joy to Have Merited the Pain. Now, this is Emily's, one scholar has called it, attempt to reconcile two desperate phases of her being. One, her love of the God of her fathers. Two, her belief in herself. There is a tension there at times, and we'll certainly see it played out here. Of course, we mentioned Emerson's self-reliance. Here we'll see it lived out, no doubt. The self, if you will, as an unbreakable column is a way to write it down now. One scholar has called this the idea of virtue, which seems a legacy of Protestant individualism. One stands alone with one's convictions and one's chief virtue, rectitude. That is to say, what is Emily's personal opinion of herself? This is how she says it. On a columnar self, how ample to rely. In tumult or extremity, how good the certainty. That lever cannot pry and wedge cannot divide conviction. That granite base, though none be on our side, suffice us for a crowd, our self and rectitude. And that assembly, not far off from farthest spirit, God. By the way, notice how God is set out between the two dashes to end this poem. Emily playing all kinds of profound games, and you'll remember her contemporary, right, Henry David Thoreau, in Civil Disobedience, makes a very similar argument that even if I'm only one, I am a majority of one, he says, if I'm in the right. And here, of course, our argument will be, no, I am a columnar self. By the way, notice self capitalized. Her contemporary, of course, Walt Whitman, will play his game of Song of Myself. Here, Emily playing a very similar game. What does she have to say about herself? Well, I think the key word happens in the second line. On a columnar self, how ample to rely. She might have been channeling, of course, Matthew 6:20 from the Gospels. Lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth cannot corrupt. You'll remember. How ample to rely. Again, this idea of relying only used one other time in 3:16. And I think it's profound that this is what she's asking. What do I rely on? Interesting, the last word of the poem, of course, is God. But what do I rely on? She says, I rely on myself, on a columnar self. In other words, this is architecture. She says, I'm building the structure with a column that's so strong, because it's made of granite, that it's never going to fall. It's never going to fold. Notice she says, it will outlast the tumult. It will outlast the extremity. And it's, of course, to be read almost as if there's a certain kind of full stop that will play. Now, some scholars have pointed out, Emily may be playing around with a Shakespearean sonnet here. You'll remember from Sonnet 55, when wasteful war shall statues overturn and broils root out the work of masonry, nor Mars his sword, nor war's quick fire shall burn the living record of your memory. I think there is a good argument to be made that Emily's drawing to some degree on this idea from Sonnet 55. In tumult or extremity, how good the certainty. Some have argued that's the key word of the poem. I'm certain that lever cannot pry. Of course, you'll remember it's the famous Archimedes line, give me a place to stay in and I can move the world. That idea that I want to be so solid that no lever can move it. And wedge cannot divide. And then it's there. Conviction. An idea, one scholar has called this, an idea grounded in the deepest layer of the spirit. Conviction. Dash. That granite base. Dash. And of course, again, maybe a full stop here to mark it in your notes. This granite base is the source, one scholar has said, of her poetry and her poetic project. This will take us as well back to poem 422. Though none be on our side. In other words, I really don't care if anybody else thinks my poetry is that great. I believe in what I'm doing, she says, and I will stand on that column. I will stand on that foundation. Suffice us, maybe another key word of the poem, suffice us for a crowd. One is a majority, she says, if, in fact, one is able to stand for oneself, rely upon oneself. And then again, back to ourself and rectitude. It is interesting that she goes from self to ourself, as if she's kind of including you in this poem. In other words, when you know that you are able to stand on your own, you are a self, capital S. And in that regards, you can rely. Ourself and rectitude. Some have suggested that maybe the word for should be in front of rectitude. And that assembly, not far off. Now, this assembly is interesting. Is she talking about the saints? Is she talking about other poets? Is she talking about heaven? Is she talking about what does T.S. Eliot call it in Hollow Men? Those who have crossed with direct eyes the depths of their kingdom. Remember us, if at all, not as lost violent souls, but only as the hollow men, the stuff men. That idea of direct eyes. There's people watching on the other side. Hebrews 11 comes to mind. That host of witnesses, as that text will call it. Those who are watching from the other side. She calls it the assembly. Note is capitalized, which seems to suggest almost like a convocation, almost like a gathering. Almost like, to use the Greek term, ecclesia. We know the word is church, right? A gathering, an assembly. Maybe it takes us back to 569. You'll remember when we did this one together. I reckon, when I count it all, first poets, then the sun, then summer, then the heaven of God, and then the list is done. But looking back, the first so seems to comprehend the whole, the others need a needless show. So I write, poets, all. Their summer lasts a solid year. They can afford a sun the east must deem extravagant. And if the further heaven be beautiful as they prepare for those who worship them, it is too difficult a grace to justify the dream. Poets are all you need. It's possible that she's arguing. The assembly she's concerned with is, of course, the great poets. And who were the great poets for her? Well, it's simple. It was Shakespeare and it was Milton. Those were the poets that she considered to be the greatest. Obviously, we can throw Keats in there as well. She loved him as well. Notice, the assembly is not far off. In other words, it's within reach. Is she talking about heaven? Is she talking about the poetic volumes that she loved? From furthest spirit, some have pointed out that this is furthest faith of Pilgrim's Progress. And then notice the dash of God to finish this poem. Okay, what are we going to do with a poem like this at 2a? Well, I think her argument is that great artists must learn to rely on themselves, because that is what allows them to be a part of that great assembly, if you will. At 2b, well, there's, I think, all kinds of language here. The language of architecture, can we just say it that way? I live in a house built of prose. She will say that idea that I want to build a strong house. I'm going to build it off granite so it's not going to let wilt or go away. At 3a, well, we mentioned Emerson's self-reliance. He who would be a man must be a nonconformist, Emerson will say. It's almost as if Emily is trying to suggest that what Emerson has outlined in Self-Reliance, that classic essay, she will try and live as a poet. I think it's a compelling idea. Finally, at 3b, when was a time that you had to rely on yourself? And have you built your life in such a way that is built on granite so that the assembly will accept you? Thank you.